written for Lit Reactor. It's the Storyville column by Richard Thomas, writing for the Ideal Writer. Richard Thomas has been doing this column for Lit Reactor for a number of years, and I've been following along and reading it a lot. It has a lot of great advice. And then just any article you pick up from Lit Reactor has wonderful writing information in it and a wide range of viewpoints as well. I'm a contributor to Lit Reactor, so I write one or two columns a month or articles a month, and you can check those out. But any article you pick up from Lit Reactor is going to be great. So let's run through this one real quick. I'll read what he has. I'll discuss my thoughts on it, and this will be our last bit for the stream today. All right, so again, your ideal reader. So today we're going to talk about writing to your ideal reader. I'm sure you've heard of this concept before. Let's dig into some ideas on what that means and how I think you can approach this concept. I think it can help you out quite a bit, but maybe not in the ways you might expect. All right, so let's see how he's going to surprise us. That's a good hook, by the way. Your ideal reader, your first ideal reader is you. All right, and I think this is a good one. When you write your short stories or novels, the first person you need to write for is yourself. If you write something and you're bored, uninterested, lost, or rather apathetic about it, how can you expect your readers to feel differently? When I sit down to write a new story, Richard says, I ask myself several questions. What genre is this going to be? If it's for an open call or a private invite, what is the theme, the topic, the vibe of the anthology or publication? Are there concepts that I've been dying to write about? Spontaneous human evolution, maybe, as in Ring of Fire, or emotions manifesting in actual fleshy concrete creatures? First or third person? It's almost always first for me, Richard says. I tend to avoid first person a little bit, not on purpose, in the sense of like, I think it's bad. I used to think it was bad, but I have one series that I write in first person, and I occasionally do a short story in first person, but I tend to default to third person. Most of the time. I know a lot of people that say that they don't like first person at all. I know a lot of successful authors who swear by first person, saying it's the best way to get the reader close to the action. I avoid it for certain reasons. He says it's almost always first person for him. How long does this need to be to fit the appropriate guidelines, or if it's wide open, how long do I think it might be? And then I'm off to the races. The title, the first line, the first paragraphs, the first page, the first scene, and if it's a novel, the first chapter. I'm thinking about my hooks, my setting, my characters, conflicts, internal and external, what the inciting incident might look like, what story I am promising my reader. I'm a feast or famine writer, so if it's working and I'm intrigued, digging the voice, immersing myself in the setting, then it tends to flow pretty quickly. I need to be engaged right away. I have to be curious, and it can't feel cliche or expected. What kind of dark weirdness am I starting here? It has to have depth, be unique, and set up expectations that I want to read and keep reading, or why bother? From my standpoint, I'm not afraid to write a story badly. Some people would say I do that all the time. But I tend to write my best stories when I'm not afraid of getting them wrong. So I'll write a story and take some risks, and sometimes it doesn't work, and that doesn't prevent me from trying it again another way, or taking the same idea in a different direction some other time. But I tend to just dive into the story and try to do my best with it, and even if it doesn't feel great, I kind of power through and then try to see if there's something I can salvage from it in the edits and so on. And that tends to be how I approach the story. So perfection is never really my goal in the drafting phase. Perfecting something is probably a goal in the editing phase for me. Your ideal reader may be an entire genre, and let's see what he has to say about this. Before we get to your specific ideal reader, think a bit broader first. If you are writing a horror story, then what exactly does a horror reader expect? There are so many different kinds of horror out there. You may want to write a story that has some of these aspects: psychological horror, Lovecraftian, violence, quiet, the supernatural, cosmic horror, gritty realism, gothic settings, or certain creatures. And once you have a sense of the vibe, tone, and atmosphere of this tale, you have to remember that this kind of story has two crucial elements: terror and horror. It is the pairing of the terror, suspense, clues, hints, the unknown, evidence, lore, history, etc., and then all of that leading up to the horror, the reveal, the truth, the monstrous, the rippling effect, etc. And then on top of the broad needs of horror in general, what kind of horror are you known for? I tend to lean, this is Richard talking, into psychological, the immersive, something maximalist, and a bit weird with emotional impact. Keep that in mind. For fantasy, look at world building. For science fiction, look at your technology and science. For magic realism, look at the magic. All right. One thing I would say here, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with Richard on anything about writing in the sense that I know he knows what he's talking about. I've heard horror and terror subdivided and defined many different ways. So his definition is that terror is sort of the build-up and horror is sort of the reveal, which would be a fine working definition. I know a number of people who think very, very differently involving those definitions. So his definitions, though useful, I don't consider necessarily an absolute. Other than that, I think he has some good advice on writing for genre. All right, so let's bring it down more specific. Your ideal reader as a real person. You may have an actual person in mind, and if you do, that's totally fine. Not just you, not just the genre as a broad readership, but somebody specific. It may be a peer or associate in one of your workshops who really gets you, who gives great feedback. It may be a significant other, partner, spouse, friend, or child. It may be an editor that has liked your work in the past and said kind things, gave encouraging comments, or it may just be the actual editor at the publication or press where you are sending this as a cold submission or an invite. I don't write for my wife, Richard says, because my work is too intense for her. I don't write for a specific peer or workshop, as I'm not in any right now. I don't write for my kids typically, but now and then they have been on my mind. If the story involves kids/teens or is something that may appeal to them, I do for sure write for editors in general, thinking of people like Alan Datlow, or any gatekeeper that may see the work. And if I'm writing for an anthology where I've been invited, I for sure think about what Doug Morano or David Ward or Michael Bailey might want from me with their expectation and what their expectations are. Every one of those editors has accepted work from me before. Ellen Datlow, one time for Best Horror of the Year. Doug and David, who I call D. Alexander Ward, for various things. Michael Bailey has never accepted anything I've sent him. All of these people have rejected multiple works of mine as well. Now, ideal reader as a real person is kind of a concept that a lot of businesses and writing advice tell you to get it down to an ideal person. And so you think of kind of a real person, and this is actually going to lead into your ideal reader as an imaginary person, which may be a little closer. But as a real person or as an imaginary person, a lot of business gurus and writing advice will tell you to figure out who your ideal audience is. And so if your company, for instance, normally most of your customers are middle-aged women, and they are of a particular socioeconomic group, the advice is to narrow that down to a real person, like really build a profile for one person. What's their education level? What kind of car do they drive? What are their favorite movies and shows? What do they do as hobbies? Are they a parent? Do they have children? Are they, what's their age? All of that. So like when you're making an ideal reader as a real person, you identify those things about them. If you're doing your ideal reader as an imaginary person, you invent this person that fits your audience. Now, who your ideal audience is as opposed to who your audience really is can be different. And the goal then is to identify what is real. So, for instance, I always assumed that like the horror writing I did was for guys in their 20s or 30s as sort of the focus audience. But as I actually did a analysis of my audience, who was actually buying the books, who was actually reading, I found that it was middle-aged women that tended to be my readers more often. Now, of course, there are all sorts of different readers that were coming in, but that was the majority. So when I painted a picture of my ideal reader, I was thinking of them in many senses. Now, of course, I write different things as well. So the children's books I write, I kind of think about my own children as ideal readers. And some of the children of my relatives as well. And so those are the kind of people that I would picture, and I would write toward them. Now, focusing in on one person for your audience doesn't exclude anyone else typically. Now, depending on how specific your writing is, it can in a certain sense, but not any more than it would anyway. So, for example, if I'm thinking in terms of middle-aged women, that changes the way that I post on social media. That changes the way that I advertise my reading, or my writing, and other things of that nature. If I do that, it doesn't mean that male readers aren't going to read me. It does mean that male readers who are appealed to by that same sort of promotion will read me. So again, the fact that they are male doesn't change the fact that they may like things that my ideal reader likes, but I don't expand that to be everybody in the world. I keep it to the ideal reader, and then the appeal will expand out to like-minded folks as well. Your ideal reader is an imaginary person. This may be the place where you can have the most fun and success. This will combine all the things we've spoken about already. This imaginary reader can be a combination of what you like about your work as well as the genre expectations, adding in a peer or spouse and then a specific editor. What might that look like? Let's sort it out. I'm going to fantasize a bit. What I like, this is Richard talking, dark, new, weird, maximalism, emotional, and unique. Genre expectations, add to those elements tension, atmosphere, and the play between terror and horror. Actual person, this editor likes all that plus innovation, addressing the theme, of course, and any other expectations. So when I sit down to write my next 2 stories, what I'm currently on deadline for, I will do all these things. I have ideas in mind right now, and how far do I have to push it in order to keep my work at a certain level. I don't want a good story, I want a great story, something special. I will think about what these editors like and what I want to do, and then the expectations of the genres I'm writing in. That ends up creating this kind of multifaceted entity. I keep thinking about Motley and Peredo Street Station that has 5 to 10 demands, 5 to 10 likes, and then anything else that can take the story to the next level, really pushing for something that is soundly my voice, but innovative, emotional, with impact, not easy, right? Now, part of what makes that not easy is the fact that if you have 10 expectations here, 10 expectations there, 10 expectations there, you're kind of trying to throw open your window and make love to the world, as I think Vonnegut said. And the problem with that is, like, trying to please everybody at once, you end up pleasing nobody. Your work can become thin, it can become confused. So the more you can narrow down your focus to that one specific imaginary person, or what you like tacked on to someone like that, that sort of laser focus actually is more likely to produce a solid, good story, as opposed to trying to please everybody, which can be a problem. I don't think Richard is saying to try to please everybody, but he is talking about trying to combine all these expectations into one ideal person, which I think is, like he says, it's not easy. All right, in conclusion, when thinking about your ideal reader, it may vary from story to story, and that's true. Perhaps the new fantasy you are writing is an homage to a college professor, and you'll keep them in mind. Maybe the magical realism is for your daughter. The horror story may be your attempt to get into Nightmare or Black Static or The Dark. He talks about those magazines a lot. Those are kind of his go-to magazines that he wants the most. Or maybe you're lucky enough to have gotten invited into a project and you are thinking about the editor and their taste. Add to that your own passion, desire, and interests, as well as your genres you are writing in, and you should have an exciting combination of expectations, openness, and discovery. Good luck.